G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you 2 shoulder exercises that you absolutely have to try if you have any form of shoulder pain or dysfunction. And full disclosure, it's not that these 2 exercises are magical in any way, but what they do is that they go after 2 of the main reasons for why most people's shoulders become sore in the first place. Clinically as a physiotherapist, irrespective of what type of shoulder pain a patient would come in with, whether it be a biceps tendon tear, a rotator cuff issue, I would notice the same restrictions in the same areas for most people. But more importantly, when we focus on improving those restrictions and ultimately allowing the shoulder to function better as a whole, I'd see a much faster and more complete improvement in my shoulder pain patients. The great thing about both of these exercises are both of them are ridiculously simple and easy to do, which is why I think you've absolutely got to give them a go, irrespective of what shoulder complaint that you have, just to see what it may do for you. Because if you don't, then you might be missing 2 of the biggest components of potentially why your shoulder became dysfunctional in the first place, or if you suffered a traumatic injury to your shoulder, why it may have had a reduced capacity to tolerate that incident compared to someone else. So the first exercise of the 2 is one that I found the most interesting because it doesn't involve working on your shoulder specifically. What it is just trying to find ways to improve the mobility of your upper back. Now that may sound strange if you've been dealing with shoulder dysfunction for a while, but anatomically, your shoulder and your shoulder blade sits on top of your upper back. So mechanically, if you have any hidden restriction, whether it be muscular tightness, spinal joint stiffness, rib joint stiffness underneath that shoulder blade, then it acts as a poor foundation for your shoulder to express normal motion. And what I find clinically is if you have stiffness and tightness in your upper back, which you may not even realize, then this can be one of the main fundamental reasons for why your shoulder isn't functioning normally and could be vulnerable to becoming sore or staying sore long term. So the way that I want to show you this is, before we even get to this exercise, we want to go through a movement or 2 that you find meaningful, that gives you a general sense of either how your shoulder is moving or how your shoulder is feeling, so that once we've done the exercise, we can come back to that exact same movement again and compare what impact, if any, this has on your symptoms. And for me, the main movement that I would go through with my patients is just getting someone to sit down or stand up and then lifting your arms up above your head as far as you feel comfortable. I'll try and be in the same posture each time. I'm up nice and tall. Take note of how far my left arm goes back relative to my right arm. For you, please take note of the same sensation, but depending on how your shoulder feels, take note of how high you can actually get. It doesn't matter if you can't get all the way up to the end of your range. If you are limited by pain, that is still a metric that we want to respect and take note of, so that once we've done this first exercise, you can compare the exact same movement again and hopefully see that something is either moving or feeling better straight away. So once you've done that, all we essentially need for this exercise is a ball. Now this is a lacrosse ball. You can use a massage ball, a tennis ball, a spiky ball. You can use anything that you have at your disposal. It doesn't matter. But all we want to get you to do with this is take your ball, and again, starting at the base of your neck where there's a bit of a bump that stands out. We want to have the ball on that bump. We want to move down a little bit and then off to the side that we want to work on. And then all we're doing here is lying down on the ground. You're more than welcome to do this up against a wall as well if it's more convenient to you. But like I go through on the channel a lot with these ball mobility exercises, is that we're looking for parts of your spine and rib cage that feel stiff, tight, restricted, thicker, denser, rustier than the other side. We absolutely care about any tenderness or pain that you may be experiencing, but for the purpose of this specific exercise, you could have all of your pain and tenderness on the symptomatic side, but if you roll the ball across your spine to the exact same spot on the other side, and this side feels stiffer, tighter, and more restricted, then we actually need to spend more time on this side because it is restricted. If the other side is stiff, tight, restricted, and the most tender, that's perfectly reasonable, but just go hunting for something that feels a bit restricted, and then we have 2 options. If this is comfortable for you, you are welcome to stay here, let the ball sink in there for 30 seconds or a minute, allow it to get to those joints and ask them to respectfully mobilize. If you want to put a little bit more pressure through that, you're welcome to bridge up a little bit to get more body weight through there. It will ramp up how this feels for you. The thing that I would like you to do based on how this feels for you, if you can progress to this, please do, is I want you to take your arm up, keeping constant pressure on the ball, and very gently lift your arm up as far as your body will let you, paying great respect to how symptomatic, painful or stiff this feels, and gently oscillate in and out of that end range. And what you'll hopefully notice is very quickly, wherever your arm started to get tight, once you shear that tissue free a little bit, it should start to get lower and lower and lower. So for me, if I move down to another spot that feels a little bit stiff, I will bridge up for this one just to put a bit more pressure through it. It does feel a bit more intense. I can get to here comfortably before it feels a bit tight in this area. But as you'll see, as I start to gently oscillate in and out of this range, it'll start to go lower and lower and lower until, while keeping my arm straight, I should now be able to get my hand to touch the ground. And what this first exercise does is we're looking for anything that you feel is restricted, and then we're using movement to shear free some of that restriction. Now, we're definitely going to get some muscular mobilization, but the joints underneath are often where the main handbrakes tend to be for most people. And if you can spend 10 or 15 minutes just systematically working your way down to about where your shoulder blade finishes, then what you'll hopefully find very quickly is that when you come back to your shoulder motion again, and I won't look at the camera so I don't cheat, but that's as far as I feel I can go with my left side. But what you'll hopefully see is that it's now traveling further back than it did before. And the reason for that is there's a bunch of stiffness here. As my shoulder blade needs to wind up my back to allow my shoulder to come up higher, if it runs into a restriction, it can't express that normal motion to the same degree that it should. And if this particular joint, this scapulothoracic joint, doesn't move smoothly, all of a sudden the shoulder then has to try and do something different to make up the difference or to work around that restriction. So the reason why this is the first exercise that I think absolutely anyone needs to do with any shoulder pain at all is because if you don't have a mobile and supple upper back where your shoulder blade and your shoulder sits on top of, then it's hard to expect for you to have normal shoulder function. So let me know in the comments down below how that felt and what you find when you did it. And then let's compare it to the second exercise. So the second exercise that we're going to look towards is more shoulder specific. And where we want to look this time is we want to look at the tissue at the back of your shoulder. So again, it's very close in proximity to the tissue in your upper back, but the tissue at the back of your shoulder is really important if it becomes tight, because tightness at the back of your shoulder tends to limit your ability to internally rotate your shoulder. And the reason for this is if the tissue at the back is tight, then when you try and internally rotate that shoulder, it doesn't open up in the way that it should. And the reason why this is so important is that if you are lacking shoulder internal rotation, then what your shoulder does is if you can't get all the way down through full range of motion, if you can only get, say, halfway there, the only way that you can complete that task is if your shoulder changes the position that it's in. And tightness at the back of the shoulder or a lack of internal shoulder rotation is one of the main reasons why we see shoulders that want to dump forwards into a bad position, fundamentally changing the way you load your biceps tendon, your rotator cuff, your bursa, and any tissue within that shoulder. Especially if you then need to go overhead or do something repetitive, you are now doing that with the shoulder that is in less than a mechanically advantageous position, as opposed to the shape that it potentially should be in. So to cut a long story short, if you're tight at the back of the shoulder, you can very easily force your body to be working in a different position altogether. So it goes without saying that if you aren't doing something to improve the mobility at the back of the shoulder and working towards having a normal shoulder internal rotation range of motion, then again, all the rehab work that you might be putting into your shoulder pain or shoulder dysfunction currently can still be very useful, but it might be missing the bigger picture or the bigger context that's asked it to be there in the first place, or at the very least kept it hanging around. So the second exercise we can do in two different ways. The first way that we want to do this is we want to do what's called the across the body stretch. So what's really important to understand before doing this exercise is that we want to start this exercise from a good shoulder posture. We don't want you to start from being in a rounded shoulder position and then pulling it across, because that may increase your ability to jam up that shoulder. Instead, try pulling your shoulders back first before pulling your shoulder across. Now, if you need to round your shoulder a little bit more to increase the tension at the back of the shoulder and find a better stretch, then so be it. But this exercise is only appropriate for you if you can find some tightness at the back of the shoulder without annoying anything at the front or the side of that shoulder. But if you can get into this position position comfortably and you can find that tightness, the secret to this exercise is we don't just want to hold you here for 30 seconds to a minute and hope that this tissue frees up. Once you've found your tightness, you try and tense up that tightness by pushing back into the stretch. So in this instance, we want to find the tightness, maintain this bent arm position, and with your straight arm, we want to very gently push back into your bent arm for 5 to 10 seconds. What this does is that it asks that tightness to activate. It creates a reflex in your brain, and when you stop tensing after 5 to 10 seconds, that tissue should give a little bit, which means you should then be able to immediately go further into the stretch than what you could before. And all we want to do is keep repeating that process of squeezing, relaxing, going further until you either get sick of doing the exercise or you stop making change. And what you should find after doing this is your ability to rotate your shoulder down should immediately be that little bit easier than before. And any particular movement that you had before that felt a little bit more tender and uncomfortable, if you can feed some slack into that area from behind, it may then start to make that shoulder function better and ultimately feel better quickly. And so the other variation to this exercise, again, can use a tennis ball or in this case, a lacrosse ball. And if you feel like reaching across your body is a little bit too aggressive for your shoulder symptoms, then what we can do instead is we can take a ball, we can place that ball into the same area that we're trying to stretch. But if you can hug yourself to open up the back of that shoulder, all we're looking for is some hidden muscular tightnesses that you may never have realized were actually there. So again, just gently roll it around the back of your shoulder until you find something that feels a little bit tender. Ultimately, we're looking for something that feels thick, restricted, and tight, and that might be tender over the top. And then all you want to do from this position, you can really tense that tightness underneath the ball, hold that for again 5 to 10 seconds. The same reflex applies, is that when you stop tensing, it may give a little bit, it may instantly feel a little bit less tender, and you might feel like you can sink into the ball a little bit more than you could before. And same thing before, if you've been successful, it will immediately feel that little bit looser and that little bit more mobile than it did before. And like we're doing with both of these exercises, we're not necessarily trying to treat the label associated with your shoulder pain or dysfunction specifically. We're trying to improve the mechanics of your shoulder to create a better environment for those tissues to exist within so that your body has a chance to get those things to get better as quickly as they can. So again, give that a go. Let me know in the comments underneath how that went for you. And then once you've done those two things, the bonus thing that I want to touch on is that we always need to ask the question of why are those parts of your body stiff, tight, and restricted in the first place? So that if freeing those up does improve how your shoulder feels, we need to make sure that you're not having to consistently do this forever. You can change one more thing to make sure that these exercises become redundant. So the final piece of the puzzle to optimize these two exercises to their full potential is we need to understand why these parts of your body may have become stiff, tight, and restricted in the first place. And for me, clinically, the number one cause of stiffness and tightness in both of those areas, and again, you'll know this if you're a follower of the channel, is often just the shapes and the postures that you get into the most throughout the day. The reason being is that when we relax with gravity, the weight of the arm and the way that our anatomy is structured, it prompts our tissue to drop and roll forwards. And if you're someone who sits at a desk all day, you're driving a car all day, you're just relaxing on the couch, doesn't matter what you're doing, you can be standing, reaching down all the time as well, is that the weight of the arm hangs off the back of that shoulder, which can then prompt the tissue at the back of that shoulder to become tighter over time. But more importantly, the weight of the arm and the shoulder together hangs off your upper back. So again, if the way that your life is currently structured and you are drawn out of that nice posture often enough and for long enough to increase the resting tension through your upper back and shoulder, your brain, being an adaptive machine, will just adapt to that excess load. And it'll ask those tissues to become tighter or stiffer just to meet the demands that you're unknowingly placing on those parts of your body. So if we want to get you to the stage where you can give yourself the best chance of being free of your shoulder pain and dysfunction, then we can't expect that unless we're getting you to be more aware of the shoulder postures and shapes you're getting into. And it's not about being over the top and poking your chest out and being all the way back. It's just about making sure that you're comfortably back in a good position and taking the weight of your shoulders. If you mentally recognize that you feel like you're resting on your shoulders for whatever reason, and using a ball or doing the other stretch has freed up your tissue really well and helped your symptoms, then we can make this logical connection that that isn't a good enough environment for your shoulder to be in, and something as simple as trying to be up a little little bit taller through your back, shoulders more comfortably back. You can support yourself with pillows, raise your desk, lower your desk, raise your seat, lower your seat to help cement you in this position better. Then we can finally get to the stage where those stiffnesses and tightnesses aren't consistently being asked to be there. Ultimately, we all have the same shoulder anatomy. We all have the same shoulder mechanics. On top of that, we also all tend to live in the same modern world with the same modern demands in terms of sitting or leaning forward and relaxing. So while the consequence attached to your shoulder, that label that you've ended up with, might differ from person to person, the reason why these two exercises are potentially so fundamentally helpful for everybody is because they do go after those environmental factors that most people tend to be exposed to day to day. So once again, please let me know in the comments down below how that may have resonated with you. If you do enjoy this type of content, please leave a like on the video and let me know. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more from me. If you are someone who's been dealing with persistent shoulder pain or shoulder dysfunction and you haven't found the answers that you feel you're looking for, then please consider booking in an online consultation with me as well. I'll leave the link in the description. The other cool thing is, if you are looking for a lacrosse ball or a massage or mobility ball to help with these exercises, I'll leave a link in the description to these. I'm now able to sell official Your Wellness Nerd branded lacrosse balls. But at the end of the day, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and hopefully maybe changed your perspective on your shoulder pain or dysfunction a little. And I hope to see you in the next one.